we'll go ahead and get started. I do want to begin by welcoming you again to the Southeast Guiding Coalition post-board meeting follow-up for the phase one process of the multi-tiered enrollment program options and boundary work. As you know, at the end of the year last year, we made some recommendations which the Deputy Superintendent presented to the board on Tuesday, the 12th of January. Based on that presentation and also the public comments of some members from the Preston community, the board asked that we revisit our findings and our data and see how we can accommodate the needs of the Preston community. The request in a nutshell is that the middle school students at Creston be allowed to feed into Kellogg Middle School. Based on this recommendation, the PPS staff spent the last 2 days or day and a half revisiting data, looking at records, and trying to come up with possible options that will accommodate that need. Tonight, you will have the opportunity to review 3 options, and we're hoping, both in small group and in a whole group session, and we're hoping that you give us your input. If there is a 4th option that you come up with as well, we will take that. Next slide, please. So the meeting objectives for tonight, in essence, is to return the proposal to the Southeast Guiding Coalition to consider what other options are available for Creston to convert to a K-5 school in the 2021-2022 school year. The second objective is to provide feedback on the process and surface continuous improvement suggestions for phase 2. Next slide, please. Again, as usual, and as is our practice, we will stick and adhere to our group agreements. We're going to ask that you please stay engaged intellectually and physically. We're going to also ask that you speak your truth responsibly. We do understand that these are emotional decisions that have to be made and that they do impact us in different ways. But we also want to make sure that we keep in mind that we do have an audience and that we want to be more inclusive and collaborative. And in an attempt to do that, we do need to be responsible about how we communicate our feelings, our desires, our perspectives, and our viewpoints. Please listen to understand and believe that this is done with an open-mindedness and in the spirit of transparency. If there is anything that was omitted, it wasn't done intentionally, please bring it to our attention. We'll be very happy to address it. Be willing to do things differently and of course experience discomfort. Anytime we have revisions to make, anytime we have decisions to make around issues that impact us, of course there's a level of discomfort. And we don't always get what we want, but we can at least move towards the middle and compromise, especially if we think about the greater good and the needs of our students. Expect and accept non-closure. That is just a natural byproduct of the process in many cases. Next slide, please. So our agenda tonight is the meeting objectives and agenda review led by the district. I just covered that. We're going to look at the Board of Education request, Preston supplemental options. That will be led by both the district and Flo, our partners. I do want to welcome Flo back. Thank you so much for all the support you provided in the past, and we trust that you continue to do the same even now. We are going to have some breakout groups. We will present information in a whole group forum, and then you break out into smaller groups so you can have more in-depth conversations around the options that are presented. Then there'll be a whole group report out. We'll take a break at 7:20, and then the breakout groups will discuss the strengths and the areas of improvement for phase 1 and suggestions for phase 2. We are hoping that we have some information to take back to the board and that we have an approval of the phase 1 process by the 26th of January. The goal is to adjourn today at 8 p.m. Next slide, please. So the supplemental options for Preston for the students, middle school students at Creston are um, that we return the proposal to the Southeast Guiding Coalition and that we consider what's available. We have come up with 3 supplemental options. You will see those options, they'll be presented soon, and then we'll get community feedback. And this is just a timeline of what we expect will be an outcome. I do want to also seize this opportunity to acknowledge and appreciate the Southeast Guiding Coalition members who came to the board meeting on Tuesday the 12th. I especially want to do a shout out to Andy, who did an excellent job presenting the findings and the recommendations, and also is willing to continue to work to find a resolution for Preston. Thank you all very much. We truly appreciate your support. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, pardon me, please back up one. Tonight's process will be to review the recommendation with updated enrollment and capacity data. We'll walk through 3 staff-generated supplemental options. These options were actually created by the Portland Public School staff. So what we want is your feedback and your input. We're going to be moving out to breakout rooms for discussion and feedback. We will have flow analysts in each of the rooms to help us with our data and questions that you may have. We'll then return for a whole group report out, identify patterns and priorities in this process. Next slide, please.
So Esther, this one's going to be mine.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. It's Judy Brennan. And in true partnership, Jed Roberts and I are going to be sharing the next segment, hopefully briefly and clearly laying out some information for you that will help you in your small group discussions. As a reminder, there are also Rachel and Alex from Flow are here, and they're going to be available in your small group. So we wanted to start out by just re-grounding people in what the Kellogg option was that you recommended, and how when you look at it tonight, it's going to look maybe a little bit differently than what you remember from December. And that's because we made the decision to switch and show you information that's based on actual rising 6th through 8th graders who live in the Kellogg feeder pattern or potential feeder pattern, okay? So what you were used to seeing in the fall is that last year, the 19-20 actual students and then forecast for 24-25. For this exercise, we are taking you to a slightly different place, and we just wanted to explain it up front so that you could get comfortable with that, and then we'll start looking at how we could adjust those things to support Creston, a change for Creston. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that with this methodology of counting all the current 5th and 7th graders as if all are going to the next school together, demographers wouldn't use that methodology. It's not how Portland State Population Research Center does it. We're doing it just at this time because we know these are the kids who are most likely to go. But in every circumstance, there's some kids who don't. So this could in some ways be an overestimate. But we also want to remind you that we expect, and you were aware of this and discussed it a lot in December, a new school effect. We did a white paper for the board that analyzed the last 6 schools that have opened in the past 5 years. We expect more students to come. So in some ways, this slight overestimate by using all the current 5th and 7th through 7th graders actually starts taking us into that realm of what Kellogg could look like with the new school effect. And again, just that we apologize that this isn't data that you saw in December. We simply ran out of time to get you everything at once. So that's one change. And the next slide, Jed's going to walk you through another one. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Judy. Hi. Oh, I'm echoing.
We're good.
Is that you, Judy? Okay, here we go. I don't hear the echo anymore. Hi, everyone. Jed Roberts, Flow Analytics. Happy to see you all again in 2021. And I'm going to pick up about half of the slides here just to get you up to speed on some of these data updates that you'll see with respect to the Creston options. So in preparation for the board meeting earlier this week, PPS facilities staff took a look at the as-built designs for the classrooms at Kellogg, and a couple things happened there. One was that one of the large classrooms that was originally counted with that square footage actually ended up being a medium-sized classroom in the as-built. And there was an additional set aside now that we have more clarity on the special education placement at the building. That brings the overall capacity from 803 down to 765. So that's reflected in all the utilization figures that you're going to see going forward here. So it's a somewhat significant change, but we want to make sure that we didn't have any false additional capacity there, which is why that refreshed look was taken. So I think we go to the next slide. So this goes segment by segment to show you the differences between the 2019 enrollment that we had been looking at up through December relative to the rising grade 6 through 8 students, as Judy described, which are the 2021 grade 5 through 7 students. And as you move down the first few rows here, you see that some of these segments are very similar. One is actually brand new, and some have some rather significant increases. So Arleta, Lent, as well as a couple of the DLI programs stayed pretty steady. But I did want to point out there's a line item here for Bridger. We're holding about 25 seats for students in the Bridger attendance area that are very near Kellogg. We don't know if all those students will end up at Kellogg. There will be conversations with the Bridger community about that, but we did want to include a set aside there just to hold some amount. And those right there are the current students, grade 5 through 7, who live south of Division and west of 82nd in the current Bridger attendance area. Another big change that you'll see is Bridger Spanish DLI going from 51 to 95. That's with the addition of the second strand that's now matriculating up to 6th grade at this point. So that's something that we had talked about in December, but you see that here in the numbers. And then Marysville is actually one of the neighborhoods that has seen the most forecasted increase in residence-based enrollment. And we're seeing that play out here in the grade 5 through 7 numbers with an increase of 118 to 141. So all that gets totaled up. For a comparison, under the second green bar there that shows you the original 569 estimate that was based off from the 2019-20. That 74% is relative to the updated capacity for Kellogg. And then you see next to that, the 665 number, which would be reflective of if we use those same segments based off the grade 5 through 7 data, 2020. And then finally, adding in those our additional 25 students from the Bridger area south of Division there brings the total to 690. So we'll be including those in the estimates going forward. So I know a lot of data there. We have that all available in the breakout rooms, so we can break those segments out and get into even more detail if you need to. Next slide.
So now we're going to spend about 5 minutes explaining the ideas that we've come up with. And then in your small groups, we invite you to discuss those ideas as well as maybe use the data to come up with other ones. So we've got 3 that start at that place that Jed just described. The first is one that you actually talked about in December and ultimately rejected, but we are bringing it back. Maybe the data is a little bit clearer now. We just want you to have one more look at what it would be like if all of Spanish immersion that's at Mount Tabor Middle School stayed there for 1 more year instead of coming to Kellogg. And then the way it's modeled, all of the kids who are at Creston would come into Kellogg. The B supplement has Creston coming to Kellogg, and then Creston and all of the other neighborhood feeders, any of the kids who are in those cohorts now but don't live in the Kellogg boundary would be excluded. So when it's time to make the change at the end of this year, instead of going forward with their cohort, they would be assigned back to their neighborhood school. And we want to note that we've made an exception, and we had to work really hard today, like right up to the last minute, trying to get this estimate right, because we wanted to make sure that students who are in the special ed focused classrooms at Arleta and Creston would be coming to Kellogg, because they're supposed to be moving forward with the cohorts and into Kellogg. So when you look at the data on this, just note that even if the kids in the focus classrooms don't live in the Kellogg boundary, they would be coming over to Kellogg. At least that's how we're modeling it. They're actually going to be assigned through their individual IEP meetings. And then finally, we broke the Creston neighborhood down into 2 different chunks, and a map will be available in your breakout groups. But we used Powell as a dividing line and had the students south of Powell coming to Kellogg and then north of Powell going to Hosford. So we can show you the impact of that. And any of the other Creston students would be excluded. So if they didn't live in the neighborhood, they'd be excluded. Everything else in option C is as you proposed it. And then one other note I want to make is that when we looked at these options, we didn't include anything for Lane Middle School at this time, because the access program is still on site, is expected to be there through winter of 2022. So there's no room at next year for new students at Lane. Next slide, please. And so this chart gives you the high level picture of what each of these supplemental options result in. For Kellogg is the green bar, and you can see our starting point with our new data, starting at about 90%, moving up to 97, and all the way up to 99.3%. And then Hosford, option C would have an impact on Hosford. It would, with taking in part of Creston boundary, would be above 100% utilization. And then in option A, Mount Tabor would remain above 100% because the Spanish immersion program would still be there. That's the big picture. Now, just a couple of more details about each one before we move you to discussion. And next slide, please, for Jed.
Okay, Judy, we're going to trade these ones off, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can do them all. If you want to, you just do them all. That'll work.
All right. Well, Judy, you did such a great job, I think, of giving the high level on these 3 options here. I'd like to just focus on the potential impacts. So with option A, as Judy said, this was something that we had looked at before. I just want to point out with some of the numbers for the updated enrollment that we have here. Basically you're trading out 79 students that are in the Spanish DLI program for 134 students that are in grades 5 through 7 at Creston right now. So that's ultimately going to give us a net increase in the utilization there for Kellogg, putting it at almost 100% in this case. And we've had lots of discussions about what it means to unify Spanish DLI at Kellogg and how important that is. So that's an obvious potential impact. And Mount Tabor, we know that that's been a capacity issue that's been ongoing. Obviously, if we're not moving any of the Spanish DLI students over to Kellogg, that issue remains. Next slide. So just again, pointing out the utilization here, really quite similar to option A with almost 100% utilization here. So we did take a look at special education enrollment. So we do have some numbers figured into that that Judy had mentioned before. It's about 21 students that we know would come from, or that currently come from outside the Kellogg attendance area. There's a set aside there for those students. And as far as, the standard for, opening a new middle school, this is a situation here where students would be going back to their neighborhood program rather than being able to attend alongside with their cohort from Arleta, Lent, Marysville, and Creston in this case. So that's an impact that is of concern, I think. And then we just see increased enrollment at other schools, right, as the students go back to their neighborhood schools. And that's an impact that we haven't identified by a student enrollment count. So there's a little bit of an unknown there. So next option, the final option C.
Jed, quick question on this. I'm trying to write down the numbers. What's the assumption on the number of out of neighborhood students that would be excluded in B?
Yeah, so we can actually get into that in the breakout room.
Okay, as long as we'll have it. I just want to make sure we have the numbers to play around with. But.
Yep, we do have the comparison there. So with option C here, this is the one that we see the highest utilization for Kellogg at almost 100%. And we also see Hosford being pushed above 100% here. Really quite, as Judy had said, very similar to the recommendation with the addition of those neighborhood attending students at Creston. 23 of them, I believe, is the count north of Powell that would be applied to the Hosford count here. And I believe it's about 70 south of Powell that are applied to the Kellogg enrollment there. So I think, an issue that we see there is that there may be final boundary changes that are different than a break at the Powell, at Powell Boulevard there for a Creston neighborhood. And then we obviously see the overcrowding and the utilization issues there. So those are the options, a little bit more with respect to potential impacts. Judy, is there anything that you'd like to add?
So just a little bit on one more slide. Next slide. That we want to encourage your creativity. You do have worksheets available, or the flow facilitators can help with combining maybe some of those elements. There may be a different way to think about this. And then one other thing that came up in our discussion that we just wanted to surface for you is that you could also make a recommendation that the board place some type of moratorium that would limit students who are live in what would be the Kellogg neighborhood, but have transferred out to other schools, that they wouldn't be able to come back next year. If you wanted to try and maybe help us guard against overcrowding, it wouldn't apply to all kids. We don't actually know how many kids that could affect because we don't know how many might want to come back. But that was the other thing that came up when we were trying to look at this as staff and prepare you. And now we're excited to be listeners for how you think about it. So I think we can move to the next slide.
I have a quick question. Was there anything done to move the enrollment down to 80%, which is what the district was recommending in December, rather than allowing it to increase up into the 90s?
Well, this is what we've come up with so far. But again, in your breakout groups, you can consider other things if you'd like. We're not, you could look at other ideas.
Thank you.
Sorry, one more clarifying thing. Do any of these include, because I saw in the first table, there was like a number with some part of the Bridger neighborhood program. Do any of the numbers in these scenarios assume any neighborhood from Bridger or no?
All of them assume hold 25 seats at Kellogg for Bridger neighborhood students, all of them.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
It does.
All right, everyone. So we're going to move into breakout sessions. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to tap into not only your feedback, but you all over the last several months have developed not only a unique, but a strong and mighty muscle in being able to contend with all the complexities of these scenarios and the data. So what we'd like to do is have you break into your breakout groups. You'll be supported by a facilitator, a note taker, as well as staff from Flow Analytics who can help sort of give you not only clarifying questions, but also you can work around different strategies. We're going to ask you to center in on 3 questions. We want you to think about how stakeholders are really impacted by each of the potential supplemental options for Creston. And again, we're going to ask you to be as specific as possible in naming those stakeholders. And again, we're really wanting to be really continue to be brave and courageous around naming and making it racialized as we sort of think about our racial equity and social justice commitments. We want to make sure that you're thinking about not only opposition, but also support. Where might there be support? Where might there be opposition? And we want to make sure that we're surfacing that. And then we want to continue to ask you to see if there are other suggestions or other strategies you might employ as we did this. Like we said, we really want to get your feedback, really tap into that muscle that you've developed over time, and be able to continue to share this with not only the Creston families and the Creston community, but also with our board and staff at PPS. So we're going to be in your breakout sessions for close to 45 minutes. You will come back here. We'll do a quick debrief, and then we'll give you your break as promised, and then we'll move into the next portion of tonight. So you'll be in your breakout groups till about 7:10. We'll continue to do the thing where we check in and see how the conversation's going, and if you need more time, we can try to make some adjustments. But we wanted to give you a good 45 minutes in the smaller groups to be able to kind of work with this information. So I think we're going to turn it over to Nate the Magical, who's going to go ahead and put us into our groups. Hopefully you'll see some recognizable faces and friendly faces, supportive and helpful faces. We'll see you in about 45 minutes. Thank you. Back. It looks like we've got everyone back here through the magic of Zoom. We're going to kind of continue on. I'm going to ask each of the facilitators and note takers just to give us a high level report out of what was discussed. We'll continue to, of course, to kind of document and have the notes available after the meeting. But I wanted to get our talented group of facilitators. So I'm going to do Columbia, I'm going to do Clackamas, Columbia, and then Willamette. So as our facilitators are getting their notes ready, I'm wondering if I can ask Keely and David, if one of you could just give us kind of like the high-level overview about the discussion that your group had in the Clackamas breakout session.
Thanks, Danny. Clackamas always gets to go first. I think we should go reverse order next time. I'm sure we had a lot of conversation about Creston and what we're going to do, what our recommendation is for Creston, but then we also circle back to the amount of time that we spent to get to where we are and the recommendation that we've moved forward at this point. So we did talk about the amount of time and that we put into getting to where we are. And so, but still did have a lot of conversation about what is the best option for Creston. And so we did not land on anything and didn't necessarily reach consensus on next steps for Creston, but did have some pretty in-depth conversation. I'll let David hop in, and I know that Marissa and Beth probably also want to add to a little bit of what I just said. So I'll turn it over to them.
I just very quickly kind of reiterate what Keely said, which is I think the consensus was we gave you, we came to a conclusion for Creston, and it wasn't, no one shut down after that. There was a really good, rich, robust conversation. But I think in the end and throughout the conversation, that was, we've solved this issue. It's not perfect, but we've already come up with a proposal, as Keely said, after many, 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 many nights together, many hours working on this.
Great, thank you. Unless there's anyone else, I'm going to go ahead and move us to our next group, which would be the Columbia room. Kathleen?
Hey, Danny, sorry, before you move.
Oh, sure.
So I was in that last group, and I guess the challenge I have is when we talk about consensus, I'm the only representative in that room for Creston. So of course, like, I'm gonna have challenges. Marissa was the representative for Harrison Park. I know she spoke up and had some concerns about Harrison Park. We have issues that we haven't solved, and I feel like we've dumped them on specific schools and said we'll figure it out later. And the one thing that I brought up is that, okay, so Creston waits. We hold off until 2022. We've put this freeze on Kellogg where all the students who are going, regardless of boundary changes, that are going to Kellogg, stay in Kellogg. So Creston has to go somewhere in 2022, folks. So that means Kellogg's going to be over-enrolled in 2022. So we either do it now or we do it later, but it's going to happen for at least 2 years.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks for speaking up on that. I just want to continue to appreciate you. I know that you've consistently really sort of had to carry this water. So I just really want to appreciate you and thank you.
Can I just say comment quickly, Annie, that I think that I continue to feel frustrated with the way the decision was made to only decide on Kellogg feeders in this phase, because there are inevitable repercussions for other schools, like the other new middle school that's being created. I think that it's telling that there have been articles in the media that mention frustrations from parents of various schools regarding Kellogg feeders, and don't mention the existence of Harrison Park at all. I think it kind of shows that it's being perceived as being lower priority to PPS. That is, the consequence of making that decision to limit phase one. And we are looking at other middle schools at 100%, nearly 100% or over 100% enrollment, and then Harrison Park at like 50%. So that's not equitable.
Thank you, Marissa. All right, we're going to move over to Columbia. So Kathleen, if you would kick us off and give us the sort of high level, sort of how was the conversation?
Yeah, our conversation was very much like the Clackamas group. They kept going back to the actual process that our original decision was made using a specific framework. And the fact that we're revisiting this decision doesn't seem to match what's in the framework. It doesn't seem to align with the framework. And so there was a lot of questioning around why we're reviewing the process or making these other considerations, and why our original proposal wasn't accepted. We did start to, we don't want to be, we did start to go to the table and start to look at different options, but there's huge concern about the level of overcrowding at all three of the middle schools that were shown on the chart, because that was one of our original focus areas, was to make sure that we did not overcrowd schools, because that would decrease the quality of the experience for our students. And Shanice, was there anything I'm missing?
That summarized, I think, what there was a lot of consensus around. There were definitely some ideas, a lot of folks, I think, resonating with our earlier group's comments in questions around potential different options, like 8th graders of Creston potentially shifting versus the entire community, or what a short-term solution could look like versus overall. But yes, I think that summarizes.
All right. Thank you, Kathleen and Shanice. Let's turn over to Willamette. So Kristen and Stephen, could you summarize your group's discussion for us?
Yeah, it was very similar to the other two. Lots of concerns about overcrowding, concerns about that we did the very best we could in the first proposal that was brought forward, confusion about why we were being asked to come back, and wondering if the rules had changed. Some folks said, like, if we have a new frame for how we're supposed to set this up, we can follow that, but just need to understand sort of like, what are we doing now? Stephen, anything that I've missed? Chuck is saying in the chat, keeping the schools as K also diminishes the middle school experience for students. Certainly there's concern that about Creston not being served now. There was also some discussion about whether Arleta should be pulled out, and neither Arleta nor Creston should go. There was a conversation about Harrison Park and the fact that Harrison Park has to wait. So why is it problematic for Creston but not Harrison Park? Is there anything else that I'm missing, Stephen?
That pretty much sums it up. Beyond, there's some things that are maybe inevitable down the road. Either it could be now or it could be, a year later, but it's going to have to happen at some point. And so really talking about that, how that impacts the student experience as we move forward.
All right. Thank you. And so I want to continue to just thank you all for all of your input and for continuing to stay with us as we try to iterate and really try to make this a meaningful process. So what we're going to do is we're going to take I'm going to take executive sort of facilitator privilege and give us a 7-minute break, and this is so that we can get out of here at 8 o'clock at our original time. So I ask everyone to take 7 minutes to be back here at 7:30, and at 7:30 we'll be we'll reconvene and continue to get more of your feedback and input about the process. So we'll go ahead and see you back here in 7 minutes. Thank you. Everyone, it is 7:30, so hopefully you had a chance to stretch out and to clear your head for a little bit. So one of the things that we want to do next in our next breakout session is to give everyone an opportunity to continue to provide feedback about the process. So as you know, tonight will sort of be the end of phase 1 of the Southeast Guiding Coalition, and the next time sort of like we get together, we will be focusing in on phase 2. And so in the spirit of trying to continuously learn, to kind of really have us continue to iterate and improve the process, we're very interested in continuing to take your feedback about how to improve the process. And certainly, I think that in some of your discussions in the earlier breakout group, you had some ideas. So if you'll recall, we sent out a survey for members, and we had a good, about a quarter of everyone has responded. I want to continue to encourage you to respond. We'll hold that open. And tonight will be another opportunity to provide feedback. So in your breakout groups, in the same breakout groups, we're going to ask you to reflect on and to have some discussion with a little bit shorter time on these questions. So we want you to think about where are areas of improvement or further growth for us. What is important to continue? If there's things that worked, what would you want to make sure that is continued in phase 2? And then if you wouldn't mind thinking about kind of what would your hopes be for phase 2? If you could try to get into the aspirational point of that would be really, really helpful for us as we move forward. We'll do a quick report out, and then we will go ahead and dismiss you for the night. So we're going to give you about 20 minutes, and I want to just encourage everyone to begin the conversation. We're going to try to get as far as we can tonight, and just know that there's still some other ways that you can continue to provide feedback into the process as Claire and the team continue to really try to make improvements for phase 2. So the magical Nate is going to take us back into our groups. We're going to be really well supported by our facilitation team and the note takers, and we'll see you back here at 7:50. We'll report out, and then we'll go ahead and adjourn on time tonight. Thank you, and we'll see you soon. I want to thank you for going through that. We're going to do a lightning round sort of report back. And to respect Dr. Simpson and the great state of Texas, we're going to start with the Willamette room first. I'm going to ask the facilitator and note takers if you could give us your best 30-second overview of what you discussed. And then we'll go ahead and talk about next steps and close this out so that we get out on time at 8 o'clock. So if you don't mind, starting with Stephen Stapleton and Kristen Westfall.
Yep. So we had lots of thoughts about how we can continue to improve, including making sure that all communities have kind of a knowledge of what's happening and access, including translation, including representation from folks of color, representation across different linguistic communities, making sure that we consider when and how we're meeting and whether that's accessible to folks, making sure there's translation of what's happening in the meetings as well as translation of documents and proposals, making sure that we use expertise of folks in the district as well as establishing clear priorities up front and making sure that we don't go in a circle and kind of go one direction and then come back and go a different direction later on. Searchability of documents and organization of documents was something that came up, and more engagement of students and teachers. I know I'm missing some things. There were a lot of suggestions for what we could continue to improve. People liked the small group time. They appreciated the Discord app. They appreciated Flo being present in the group, along with some other experts from the district. And there was a hope that Harrison Park will be filled, and so phase 1 will be flexible. Anything that I've missed?
Great job, Kristen. I'm gonna move us to the next group. So if you don't mind, Kathleen and Shanice, if you could give us your best concise and up-to-date information about what happened in your group.
All right, well, be as concise as possible. Making sure that input is honored, for example, and time is used in a useful manner. So for example, tonight didn't seem like the best use of time for some because it didn't align with the framework that we had established before. And there were also comments about filling out the surveys and that we're answering the same questions in the sessions that we answered in the surveys. And how is that input used, and do we ever get to see that input? And then there was also a discussion about, making sure we have better representation, more student representation, more student voice, as well as representation from more of our BIPOC community, and being creative and thoughtful about how to gain that input. I mean, a lot of other notes, but
we've got them, and we'll report those out. I really appreciate you being so concise. I know it's tough. All right, I'm going to move on to the next group. Dr. Simpson and David Roy, anything? How would you summarize your group's conversation?
Ours was similar to the first two, around making sure we had documents translated in a timely manner and that voices were also that all voices were heard and represented. And we also just talked about how once we moved into a place where we had a clear focus, that our work together on Thursdays became much clearer, and we had a clear outcome and goal to reach. And so everything the first two groups said, plus also making sure that we start phase 2 with a clear purpose and clear goals. David, if I missed anything, jump in.
No, I think those were all the big themes. Really great feedback from our group.
Great. Well, I just want to let everyone know that we're still very interested in collecting feedback. We are taking in everything that you're there and hopefully everything that you're saying, and hopefully you'll continue to see how we're responding and really trying to make improvements so that this is a process that we can continue to learn from and continue to do better. So thank you. And, you know, before we close out, we have some next steps that we want to share with you. So if you could go to the next slide. We just want to let you know that, as Esther mentioned earlier, we are going to continue to collect feedback from the Creston community. We'll be sending the response to the Board of Education before the January 26th meeting. We're also going to be doing that recruitment and really trying to hit some better notes around making sure that we have representative membership for phase 2, really focusing on the diversity and, you know, not just racial and ethnic diversity, but also thinking about some of the other elements that people have talked about, including student voice. And then we'll be trying to kick off a phase 2 meeting at the end of February. So continue to watch out for those meeting announcements. And we, you know, because we really did this work, this incredibly complex work at like a breakneck pace, we want to sort of let folks know that this is a process that will run through the fall. We really want to make sure that there's time not only for deliberation and for dialogue, and to be able to go through the sort of messy part of this, so that we can iterate. We want to make sure that we also give time for staff and the leaders at PPS to be responsive to the time in between meetings. So, so if we can go to the next slide. I just want to encourage folks to continue to give feedback. There's, as always, a community feedback form if you're watching online. There's also going to be the feedback form that's in the chat. And the survey is still out there if you want to continue to provide feedback about the process. I want to thank you. I found myself during the last board meeting when we were presenting about this process. I wanted to make sure that the board and our community knew just how much you all have struggled and really grappled with really difficult, complex information. And I just continue to be inspired by your commitment and your dedication and your willingness to give up time and your thought partnership to us. I feel very, very fortunate to live in a community with all of you. And thank you for your time. And thank you for what you've done with us up until this first phase. And in the spirit of wanting to grow and be better, we're going to take that and really reflect and try to continue to improve at PPS. So thank you for your time. We're going to go ahead and close out. I hope you have a great rest of your evening and a wonderful end to your week. Thank you.